It's been a little while since I had my co-authors from the JFK Assassination chokeholds on the show, so I wanted to bring back Jim, Andrew, and Mark. In this episode, we'll get an update on the state of the JFK records, talk about the McCone Rowley memo that keeps coming up, and go over some thoughts on LBJ along with some other stuff. First, I do have a quick program note in terms of the show schedule. I was planning to go live this week with the first episode in the Mafia series. Then I remembered that my producer slash audio engineer is an actual rock star who helps operate a major music festival in Ocean City, Maryland. Shout out to the Carousel Motel, Bobby Baker. Anyway, it's every year in late September. It's called Ocean's Calling. Jerry DePizzo, the producer, plays 3 sets with his band OAR, and he helps coordinate the overall festival, which has 50,000 people per day. Long story short, I can't get in the studio for a couple of weeks, so we had to delay the Mafia just a bit. We'll be off next week, but I will have a fun YouTube slash Patreon interview with AJ Weberman if you want to check that out. After that, we'll be off and running on the series, exploring whether the Mafia had any involvement in the assassination of President Kennedy. We're joined by distinguished author and screenwriter of Oliver Stone's Destiny Betrayed, Jim DiEugenio, as well as Canadian attorney, National Archives explorer, and JFK Records Act expert, Andrew Iler, and attorney and JFK Records Act expert, Mark Adamczyk. Coming up next on Solving JFK.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting. The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
I don't know what this is all about.
Dallas police this morning resumed custody the man they have formally charged with the assassination of President Kennedy.
I'm just a patsy.
The man is Lee Oswald.
Was Oswald acting alone, or was he a member of a conspiracy? Commission answers, he acted alone.
I'm working I'm just a patsy.
Gentlemen, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on again. It seems like there's always some sort of new development with the JFK records and everything happening with the committee. So I thought, Andrew and Mark, kind of 2 of the best in the biz. So I guess why don't we maybe go ahead and get started with that update to the JFK Records Act pursuit of getting all these documents and where we are on things.
Yeah, Matt, what I'm hearing through the grapevine is that the task force has been extended to the end of the year. I think you've made a note of that in one of your previous shows. But the focus on the JFK records may be something that is a little less uncertain because the task force is focusing on UAPs right now and may focus on the Epstein files. So JFK is one among many other matters that the task force has committed to tackling. There's RFK as well as Martin Luther King. So they have their hands full, and it's almost October now. So we really don't know whether there's going to be another hearing on JFK and the extent of energy and bandwidth that they have left for JFK. I hope that the task force really does focus in on compliance on the JFK Records Act, because, hey, there's a piece of legislation that specifically deals with it and requires Congress to have oversight over the JFK records and to make sure that the JFK Records Act has been fully complied with. And I know that's something that Mark has taken some extraordinary steps to dig into and to correspond with Representative Luna and the task force.
So Let me ask you this. You had identified these final determination forms, some of them that you famously among the a few thousand people who are following this closely, but truly, it was a big deal. You found these forms. There should have been thousands more of them. Is there any update on that front in terms of where the rest of them are, and can we find out any information about these specific documents?
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret, at least from my standpoint, that these ARRB final determination notifications, they're required by the Act for every record. And as well, the Administrative Procedures Act requires independent agencies to provide adequate written reasons for all of their decisions. And there was definitely a standard of proof that applied, and the APA applies through Section 11 of the JFK Records Act, and it actually specifies that all of the decisions are subject to judicial review under the APA. So the APA standards are in place, and if the ARB final determinations are not the written reasons of the ARB, I don't know what is, because adequate reasons have to provide fairly detailed justifications for any agency final action. And the only thing in my mind that was issued by the ARB are actual final determinations.
Mark, do we know what we have left and what's the status in terms of, what's been disclosed, what's still out there? Because I think it was in maybe around like 1,000 documents, but it's, a lot of people think that, as soon as Trump signed the thing, it was all done. Well, as we know, it wasn't done. A lot of
Right.
a lot of documents did come out, and it really was a declassification that was material, but we've got a long way to go.
Right.
A little bit of I was talking to Jefferson Morley a couple episodes ago. We're a little cloudy on precisely where we are with things.
Right. No, and I think it's a good question. And like Andrew said, with the other things that the task force wants to tackle, and it said it would tackle over the rest of the year, we cannot assume that there's going to be another hearing or significant work on the JFK records, at least while the task force is in place. They are going to issue a final report, as we understand, and I think that final report, it's critical that it looks at what we have from Trump's executive order and what we don't have. So when the order was signed in January, as we know, there was two excellent hearings. Jim was there on April 1st with Oliver Stone and Jefferson Morley. And then, what really jumped off to me with respect to the records collection was Judge Thunheim's testimony on May 20th about what, he knew that the review board saw. And then, he went out and said, like, look, I don't know what the big deal is with these continuing presidential delays. There should have only been about 1,500 records that the review board saw for Trump to maybe make a decision on in 2017. Instead, we saw wide sweeping delays from Trump and Biden. And, then we saw a records release in 2025 as the result of Trump's order, which was specifically 2,566 new PDF records with for sure fewer or no redactions. But what we do not have from Trump's order, and what I really want to see the task force focus on in its final report, is we don't know, what that release ties to in the official full collection of assassination records at NARA through an index and collection. We don't know what was released. Is that everything that the review board did see, and albeit late, it is now out and fully released? Is that complied with? And then until we know that, we don't know the extent and the number of records that the review board never saw. I mean, Judge Thunheim said, look, records were sent to NARA at a later time, meaning after the review board. So we don't have a full accounting, Matt, of the full impact of Trump's order and the release of the records in 2025 without that full index at NARA of everything that was sent to the archives before and after the review board. And that's a key piece of oversight that I really want to see in the final report on this so that it can be carried forward. We know the job's not going to be done fully at the National Archives by January 1st of this year, but there can be a very solid blueprint based on the act put in place.
And Matt, if I can just jump in, that could be taken up by the full oversight committee of either the House or the Senate, who has statutory authority over the JFK Records Act and a mandate to conduct this kind of oversight with the whole committee. And I do have to say, Jim, on Kennedy's and King, this isn't just Mark and I weighing in on this. I mean, Jim published two major pieces by Oliver Stone and Doug Horn on Kennedy's and King, and maybe this can segue into those articles that Jim published.
Jim, you want to comment on either of those?
Well, Oliver Stone calls me up one day and he says, Jim, do you know Rubio was the acting archivist of the United States? And I said, I thought he was Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Well, take a look and you'll see he's the acting archivist now. And so I looked, I said, God, Oliver, you're right. He is the acting archivist. And he goes, well, in light of that, I think instead of sending my letter to Luna, I think I should send it to him and CC Luna. Okay? So this was all his idea, all right, to go ahead and send it to Rubio. Now, me and Andrew did some work on it, okay, and he went ahead and then put it together in its final form, all right, and then once it was there, he actually tried to get it hand delivered. He was going to pay for a courier to actually put it right on the desk, but the National Archives won't allow you to do that, okay. And so he sent it, as priority mail with his name on it, etc. And in that letter, he tried to bring to the attention of the acting archivist that there was this matter of the FDNs, all right? And therefore, the question is, why are we still requesting that certain documents be declassified? Okay, if you have these FDNs there, which I admit are very hard to find. Andrew only found 450 of them. Okay, there's probably literally hundreds, if not thousands of them hidden someplace, but the archives, and by the way, and in that letter, Oliver did go after the archivist also. Okay, because, he literally said, everyone I talked to says that whatever catalog or inventory you have is a screaming bloody mess. It's very, very difficult to find things, all right? And by the way, and let's not forget this. This is literally breaking the law, okay? And by the way, and it's also breaking the law twice. It's in defiance of Congress, all right, because according to the JFK Act, everything was supposed to be declassified in the fall of 2017, all right? And now, Bobby Kennedy got Donald Trump to actually issue an executive order. And that was 8 months ago. So, is the National Archives literally above the law, both the executive branch and Congress? I mean, because that's what we have here. All right.
It seems like they're riding on the administrative error train that so many have been carried by in the JFK assassination. Oops, I don't know, we lost it. I don't know where that went. We should have 27,000 of these, but we only have 450 in this press contacts box, so.
Matt, the big misunderstanding that a lot of people are having is that, somehow Trump's great executive order, that was a seismic move forward for us, for the President of the United States to issue that order. But the fact is, Section 11 of the JFK Records Act says that any order or decision that's made that is to either obtain a record or to publicly release a record takes priority over all other laws, and that would include executive orders. So the concept that President President Trump's executive order somehow supersedes the ARRB's final orders is a bit of it's a bit of a misconception of the law. And when you tie in the fact that President Clinton, by way of a memorandum of understanding he approved with the ARRB back in July of 1995, that memorandum in effect certified all of the ARRB's decisions. All of the ARRB's final determinations were in fact certified by President Clinton by way of this memorandum of understanding that no one had seen until July of this year. And so this is a big thing. And I don't know, maybe Mark wants to make that even more clear than I just tried to do.
No, I mean, Trump's order does say, I think it's time to release everything, okay? And we saw over 2,500 files released. The problem is we don't know what everything is and how to account for it until the archivist does its administrative job of cataloging and indexing everything it's received under the JFK Records Act. And so, the oversight committees have continuing jurisdiction over the JFK records collection under the statute. It's within their purview to go to the archivist and say, do a darn index of everything you've ever got, especially before and after the review board, because the final determinations, once they're located, will answer what the review board did. Then you have a full index with identification aids so that we know what work is left to be done. So while Trump's order, could be viewed as a final presidential certification to release everything, in other words, he's not going to override, and authorize any redactions anymore, we still don't know what everything is. So that's
and Mark, maybe I'll throw in as well. With all respect and appreciation for President Trump's executive order, it has no enforcement mechanisms. But all of those enforcement mechanisms are available under the JFK Records Act. So the whole idea of kind of relegating the JFK Records Act and suggesting that the executive order supersedes it, you lose all of those enforcement mechanisms that the act provides. And again, I don't want to downgrade President Trump's executive order because it's fantastic. And it has released a lot of new records. But to forego the accountability, enforceability, and transparency elements of the JFK Records Act, I personally think it's a big mistake, and it's a loss for the entire research community that's going to benefit from having, like Mark, both of us keep pounding away here. We need a full index and catalog of records that shows what the status of all of the records in the collection are.
So as a practical matter, what's the most likely way to get that / where do you see this going from here? I mean, okay, the committee's going to issue a report, but we really need legislation, do we not, to force, or do you think we should not have legislation because we already have it? We already have the final orders.
Yeah.
Well, look, sorry, Mark. Look, the final determinations only cover the records that were reviewed by the ARRB. And what we believe happened based on records that we have seen from the CIA and from the archives, it shows that records were transferred possibly before the ARRB was established and before the act was passed, but more likely that records were transferred to the National Archives after the ARRB ceased its operations in September of 1998. And Judge Tunheim's May 20th testimony backs that up when he says, hey, I've never seen a bunch of these records before. They were never shown to the ARRB. And that means that the ARRB never reviewed a whole bunch of the newly released records. And my reading of the metadata of these records show that they were transferred to NARA, some in November 1998, like 2 months after the ARB went out of business, or in the year 2000. So we got to know why these records were transferred late. Were they withheld? What standards were they postponed under? There are so many questions with regard to all of these records that I think Congress, it just by nature of its own act that was passed unanimously, has to follow up on this, because it's really the burning question, if you ask me.
To conclude with Andrew said, leaving NARA and agencies to continue to interact with each other on the, what's in the collection. Are we going to release this now? What do you think? And then there's still, I know there's efforts to still search for records outside of the collection. That's fine. But we really need to focus on what is the collection now. And has everything been released so Trump's order will meet its purpose? And the JFK Act will meet its stated purpose. You just got to get an index of everything that's there to have a reference point. That's all.
The implication in Oliver's letter, I believe, what he was trying to say, is that Luna should get the archivist, whoever that person is, under oath, and question whoever that person is, male, female, okay, about what is going on with these records. Why is there no usable index? Okay, what happened to the FDNs? Were they ever transferred to you, or were they not? And why, as of, what is it now? We're going on 8 years past the deadline. Why haven't you released everything? Because if you remember, and I'm not sure very many people do, the way this all started back in the summer of 2017 was that the chief archivist at that time over the Kennedy stuff, her name was Martha something. I can't remember her last name.
Murphy?
Yeah, that's it. Okay, Martha. She announced that, look, I am going to release all this stuff in October of 2017. And so what did the CIA and FBI know? What did they do? Knowing that she had said this in the summer of 2017, what did they do? They waited till the last day, the last day, and they demanded a meeting in the Oval Office with Trump, and they gave him, what I usually call the blood on your hand speech. Okay. In other words, if you go ahead and release all this stuff today, we've got this agent over in Morocco who's going to be named in it. And believe me, you're going to put his life in danger. And if that happens, we will get it all over the front page of the New York Times. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's how this all started. Okay, and then what happened, as Andrew noted in his article for Kennedy's and King, if it was possible to be worse than Trump, Biden did it. Okay, he was actually worse than Trump. So then what I suspect happened is that Bobby Kennedy arranged a deal with Trump, saying that, all right, I'll endorse you, but I want two things. I want to be chair of HHS, and I want you to sign an executive order declassifying. And by the way, remember, his executive order is not just about the JFK case. It's also about the RFK and the King cases, all right? And so that's how we got to the point where we're at today. And that's why I think Oliver is rather kind of, overtly implying that the archivist has to be placed under oath, either in a deposition or a public interview, and ask what the heck is going on here.
You know, Jim, you always are so great. I love when you do it, because that is, how can you have this task force and congressional oversight without calling the archivist? It's just such a lost opportunity to really get to the bottom why all these records have been withheld for 60 years. And I don't recall the archivist testifying in the last 30 years since the ARRB. I don't even know if the archivist testified at the time that the JFK Act was enacted by Congress. You probably have a better memory of
I
that.
remember Martha Murphy being on the witness stand when the act was being passed.
You don't remember that?
I don't remember her being on the witness stand. No.
Yeah, yeah. And Matt, but just before we move on, maybe Jim could mention Doug Horne's letters. He wrote 3 letters to the task force. I mean, his first letter, I personally think, is tremendously important, and it deals with the evidence from the autopsy that he's been calling on for years. And then he actually wrote a letter about the ARRB final determinations as a former senior staff person of the ARRB. Jim, is there anything that you can?
No, I thought that was actually Andrew's idea to have those printed. Okay. And so I got in contact with Doug, and then he agreed to let us print those. And I think the double whammy of Oliver and then Doug Horne, okay, I think that, might have what I call moving the immovable object. Okay, I think that inched us a little bit, forward. Okay, in the arena of debate about this issue. I think we might be making a little bit progress now. Doug, of course, was in charge of the military records, and he was involved with Jeremy Gunn. Jeremy Gunn was the chief counsel of the ARRB. All right. And he and Doug did an over year-long investigation of the medical evidence in this case. They interviewed 11 surviving people, all right? And some of those interviews, I believe, were very, very important. Okay, they had one guy who actually did the x-rays of Kennedy's brain, and they had him under oath, okay, and they put the x-ray on the easel, and Jeremy Gunn asked him, did you take this x-ray? And he got up, walked over, put his eyes right up against the x-ray, and he said, you see those numbers at the bottom? These were done in series. I didn't do x-rays in series. Okay? He goes, and then you see this, this is the wrong film. And by the way, I'm trying to duplicate how he said it because Horne was right in the room. And he said, this is the way he was talking. He was excited. He was pausing, etc. And he says, this is the wrong film. He goes, I didn't use Anscope. I used Kodak. Now,
was that the photographer, Jim, or was that the x-ray technician, though?
John Stringer.
Stringer. Matt, what was he, the photographer or the
photographer?
No, the photographer. He was the official photographer.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sitting with 3 lawyers, right? If this was in a court of law, could you not move to have the case dismissed? Because you've uncovered fraud, and you've got the guy right on the stand. You got the guy who actually took the original pictures. And he's saying, no, I didn't take those pictures. And
yeah, so, and I mean, Doug's letter specifically asks for missing photographs, missing x-rays, and other missing specific known documentation to have either been destroyed or surreptitiously removed from the official record. And his letter is actually a killer letter. And really, we haven't heard too much follow-up on all the problems. We've got a lot of stuff from Joanides and now Diaz, but there hasn't been really too much public follow-up on how the task force has pursued really the crucial autopsy evidence.
Yeah, and if you watch that hearing, towards the end, Luna actually asked Horn, okay, what are the things you believe that are missing? And Horn went ahead and took out his little list that he had prepared, okay, and he dictated it, all right? So this is something that I, at the very least, should be in their final report about these missing, very important, articles of evidence in the Kennedy assassination. And I don't think, to anybody who really studies this case, all right, I don't think there's any excuse at all for the absolutely awful, terrible, almost unbelievable autopsy that was given to President Kennedy that night. Okay, it was literally beyond belief, and to have 42 people in the gallery. And by the way, that's a low estimate because not everybody signed on to the list that was passed around. And to have that many people from the military, in that autopsy room, and to have Peter Fink actually admit on the stand at the trial of Clay Shaw, we didn't dissect the back wound because we were told not to. Okay, to have something, now that should have been front page news in every newspaper in America. Okay, but it wasn't. All right. So anyway, those are the kind of things that Doug Horn was investigating, him and Jeremy Gunn, when he was with the ARP.
Yeah, and Doug did really strong work on that for sure. Well, hey, thanks to you guys for the work that you've done on the JFK Records Act and pushing the ball forward to get disclosure of all these documents and to get an accounting of them. And hey, I haven't specifically mentioned this yet. KennedysandKing.com. That's Jim's website, and you've had that for a while, right, Jim?
Many years, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a vast resource. I mean, whenever I come across anything, I go, what is the opinion of Kennedys and King on this matter? And it's a good, I like to cross-reference Kennedys and King, then I like to go look at Bugliosi and see see what the polarity looks like there. Let's quickly move on to, I just wanted to get your opinions on a couple of LBJ topics because we haven't talked about it before. Now, Jim, I remember the first time I met you, the first question I asked, this is within 10 minutes of meeting you, something about Madeline Brown, and you were like, who, your response, I believe, was, quote, "Who is this guy?" Like, why are you here? What are you doing? But anyway,
you asked me a lot of questions, if you remember.
I was there.
I did. I just peppered you, man. Yeah, that was pretty funny. Anyway,
I still haven't given you a bill for that. Okay.
No, yeah. Good thing you don't bill like I do. Anyway,
I think what you want to bring up is Billy Celeste. Celeste was this con man who accumulated a small fortune that was gained through selling phony cotton allotments and phony silos of ammonia, okay, fertilizer, all right? Now, one of the people he screwed over wrote a letter to the FBI and the Justice Department, all right, about what this con job that Billy was performing on his said-to-be clients, all right? And this eventually filtered into Bobby Kennedy, but not before it made it into a small newspaper down there. It was called the Pecos Times or something like that, okay? And that's what really gave it some vibrancy and got it into the media, right? And so now LBJ and Hoover tried to get the reporter taken off the story. All right. It didn't work. Okay. And so Bobby Kennedy then sent something like an armada of FBI, Department of Justice, accountants, okay, etc., down to Texas, and they found out that all this stuff was correct, that he had defrauded these people, all right? And so he went to trial, I believe it was in 1965, and he was convicted, all right? Then he was brought out on parole. But to show you the kind of guy Billy Saul was, he then was charged again a few years later, and he was convicted again. All right, believe it was in 1979.
On similar charges.
A guy with a record like that, So then he got involved in the reopening of the Henry Marshall case. Okay, who was investigating some of these fraudulent actions, all right, and he ended up being shot. And if you can believe it, even though he was shot, I believe, 6 times, all right, the sheriff and the coroner deemed it a suicide. How you can shoot yourself 6 times and and miss 5 times, that's beyond me. All right, so he injected himself into this reopening of this case. And this is where, well, actually, I shouldn't say that, because there was an antecedent for this. But this is where Billy Saul now says that Lyndon Johnson, and by the way, before I say these numbers, I have to add this. The numbers kept on escalating for the number of murders that he accused Lyndon Johnson of being in on. I believe first it was 7 or 8, okay, including Johnson's own sister. Okay, he killed his sister supposedly. All right. So then I believe it was later revised upward to, I think it was 17. Okay, so Johnson was his own murder incorporated. All right, according to Billy Saul. All right. Now, Billy Saul and his lawyer, Doug Caddy, tried to get a deal with the Justice Department in the 80s. I believe it was Stephen Trott, okay, was the guy who was sent down. And they demanded the sun and the moon, okay, in return for his testimony. And Trott said, look, we want to see the evidence and we want you to do a polygraph. All right? And guess what? Billy Saul walked out, okay, when those demands were subjected to. Now, let me just deal with it. Oh, by the way, the antecedent I was talking about is this book, A Texan Looks at Lyndon. All right? That's where it really started to get into the Kennedy critical community, because this was a presage of that. What everybody forgets about that book was commissioned by the John Birch Society because they wanted to elect Goldwater, okay, instead of Johnson. And that's how it got in. So a guy with an agenda like that, come on, let's just take, first of all, Josepha Johnson was not murdered. She died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Second of all, the guy that they called the professional assassin, Mac Wallace, well, he has alibis for both the day Kennedy was shot and the day Marshall was shot. So when you get down to the nitty gritty, and by the way, Johnson was behind the Kinzer murder. Okay, that's another one. That was one that Mac Wallace actually did because he wanted revenge for what this guy had done to his wife. These are some of the things. Now, also, Jay Harrison, who was a Texas-based researcher, and I believe it was in the late 90s or early part of the new millennium, he came up with this so-called match between one of the prints on the 6th floor of the book depository on one of the book boxes and Mac Wallace. Okay, because Mac Wallace has always been the go-to guy for these Johnson did it people. Okay, all right, and he took this to two fingerprint, what he called experts. All right, and they both said yes, it's a match. So this meant Mac Wallace was on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Well, the second guy, a guy named Hoffmeister, okay, he backed out a couple of days later. But the original guy, Nathan Darby, stuck by his story. And this idiot, Nigel Turner, who put on one of the worst series of specials I've ever seen on the JFK case, put this stuff on one of his specials. I think it was called The Guilty Men. All right? All right. Now, here's the problem with that. It's not true. Okay? Because Joan Mellon got in touch with a guy named Garrett, who was actually, you know how good this guy was? He actually did the testing for fingerprint analysis, and you had to pass this test to become a certified fingerprint analyst. Well, how do you get much better than the guy who supervised the test? You know? And so Garrett said, wait a minute, these guys were not dealing with even good copies, let alone the originals. All right. And if I would have never taken the assignment if I had to work with this stuff. All right. And so Mellon and Garrett got a first generation copy. All right. And another one. All right. But it wasn't from the one that Nathan Darby used, because they didn't think that was smudged. And so they got a better one. All right. And unlike Darby, they did one with much higher technology, much better technology that you have today. All right. And Garrett said, first of all, the matches they call matches are not matches. And he specified in her book, Faustian Bargains, you know, why they were not. All right. And then he said, no, this is not a match at all. Okay, for this so-called print on the 6th floor. All right. Okay, but see, it doesn't matter, because these Johnson zealots, you know, none of this matters to them. Okay, you can discredit Madeline Brown, you can discredit Billy Soles, but it's like a hydra. You chop off one head, and here comes another one. So now we have, what is this now? This is 62 years after we now have this new tape, okay, that is supposed to be newly discovered. And again, what is it? It's Mac Wallace, the be-all and end-all, all right? The John Sutre of the Johnson people, all right? And even though he was in California, all right, this tape now says that Cliff Carter and Billy Soles, you know, why Cliff Carter would ever talk about this with Billy Soles, you know, that's another question you're not allowed to ask. But now this is the newest and the latest.
I dove into all the stuff you're talking about, but on the tape in particular, it sounded to, I mean, I guess my question is, and this is for Jim and for, you know, Andrew and Mark too, there's a question of, is the tape authentic? Like, was it really recorded in 1971? And then there's a separate question of, is that really Cliff Carter on the tape? And then there's another question of, if it is, are they just acting? So that's, what are your thoughts on those questions? Like, is it, do you think it's recently made up? Or?
Voice analysis, did you?
No, and there should be a voice analysis,
Yes,
right?
because there's got to be tapes of Cliff Carter.
There are two recordings of Carter talking to Johnson that I could find, but but basically he's just going, yes sir, yes sir, and then Johnson's going, and then I'm gonna do blah 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 blah, and he's like, yes sir. It's like he's really quiet, and so okay. I mean, where I landed on all that is, yeah, I'm same as you on the fingerprint. Crudell, his view is we need another independent analysis just to be sure, and why not? I mean, good. I think if that would make it clear to some folks. But my biggest thing on the whole Mac Wallace, aside from the alibis that you pointed out, is okay. What does Billy Sol Estes say? What is the Mac Wallace story? Well, the story is that Mac Wallace was shooting from, well, his fingerprint is supposedly in the Schoolbook to Cloud story. Where was he shooting from? The grassy knoll. Oh, okay. This is what Billy Sol Estes says. He says he was shooting from the grassy knoll, and then Billy Sol Estes.
He says this on the tape?
No. In his book, and yeah, in his book, and I believe
Wallace was on the grassy knoll?
Yes. Yeah, he says Wallace was on the grassy knoll. And then right, so he also says that that Mac Wallace recruited Jack Ruby, who then recruited Lee Harvey Oswald. But here's the thing, friends. We know from all the CIA documents about Oswald, all these things that are happening, that Mac Wallace most certainly could not have set up. So that's. But I will say, I will give this to the LBJ folks. He had so many legitimate connections with the power elite across the board. He was on the Armed Services Committee and dealt with intelligence when he was in the Senate and Congress, and he just had the relationships. J. Edgar Hoover, Irving Davidson's a pretty underrated relationship that he had. So my point is, could he have had some foreknowledge? Perhaps. Was he the guy? If so, we don't have a document of it, right? Was he the guy who started the whole thing? Certainly not through Mac Wallace. You can make that argument more successfully through like Howard Burris or something like that. But I just think Mac Wallace is a dead end.
Look, Billy Sol is probably the last person you'd ever want as a lawyer on the stand in a court of law. Because it would be an excruciating cross-examination. Did you lie about this ammonia thing? All right. Did you lie about these cotton allotments? All right. Why did you expect Lyndon Johnson to be able, knowing the way Bobby Kennedy felt about Lyndon Johnson, why would you ever think that Lyndon Johnson could intercede with the Attorney General to save you from all this fraud? I mean, come on, about 6 hours of questions like that,
Mark or Andrew, you want to chime in on LBJ?
Matt, one show you did that I enjoyed. See, I'm personally fascinated by his immediate actions after Dallas. I should say in Dallas. I look at kind of what he did. We know that Kennedy's body was forcefully removed for a military controlled autopsy, and we know, and you did a really good show on the phone call with Hoover about Mexico City and things like that. That's right. I mean, that doesn't really tie to foreknowledge per se or a plotter, but that's the part that drives me, because it's fascinating. How they went so quickly into covering up everything on Oswald in Mexico City, and then of course appointing the Warren Commission so quickly. So that's where that doesn't really add any flavor to that discussion you were having there. But I want to congratulate you for doing that one particular show that I did listen to the entire thing on the. There's a missing segment, right, of the call with LBJ. That's pretty big deal.
Yeah, Rex Bradford found that the 14-minute intentionally erased section, and then I did some original research that was very important to the community. I've been doing this for my entire life, just important research of reading the transcript that did exist, and I was able to use a timer and just that it was about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. That's my contribution to the original research. Just kidding. I'm joking. It was very easy to do. But okay, so the point is there's almost certainly more than just what we have from the transcript there from that conversation. And it does establish that there was a cover up by LBJ, I think for sure. Andrew, were you gonna say something else?
Yeah, I just love the fact that there's so much subject matter that we can all nerd out on our niches, and I really enjoy watching you and Jim go at the Mac Wallace stuff, like Mark and I go at the JFK Records Act.
Yeah. Well, look, anybody that really thinks Mac Wallace is the guy, I have no beef with you. I'm just saying I've laid out why I think what I think. If you disagree, you can tweet at me or something. Tell me why. All right. Next topic here. A couple of things raised by Robert Groden that I want to just bring up and just kind of run by you guys. Maybe I'll bring up the least controversial one first. He said that Geraldine Reed told him that she was giving Oswald change at the moment the shots were fired. Jim, had you ever heard that before?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, that's the reason he was on your show, to contravene what I wrote about this.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Because
read what you wrote.
the Kennedys and King got in contact with his wife, and he said words to the effect, Jim DiEugenio doesn't believe this, and he he went ahead and got a little back and forth, okay, and the wife said, oh yeah, well, Bob has this, and so he got on your show, and he went ahead and he went over the transcript, okay. I don't believe. Okay,
Are you talking about Geraldine Reed? Are you talking about McCone-Rally right now, or the Geraldine Reed part?
No, I want to talk about Oswald's location.
Okay, good, please.
Okay, in my opinion, Oswald wasn't up there at that time. Okay, I've come to believe, as people like Greg Parker have, that Oswald was outside, that he was on the foyer, that he's prayer man. Okay, that's where I believe Oswald was at the time of the assassination. Okay, so he couldn't have been where this woman, okay, Geraldine Reed, was that her name, Geraldine?
Yeah, Geraldine Reed.
All right, where she says that he was. All right, okay, and also there's a problem that Greg brought up, okay, on his now deceased reopened Kennedy case, that there's a possibility that Groden might have screwed up the two Reeds, okay, because there were two people with that last name. I believe it's REID, working there. Matt, I'm kind of at a loss to see why you brought this up with me, because now I'm going to have to get in another back and forth with Bob Groden. But he could come back on your show, okay, and say, Jim DiEugenio smeared me in front of that.
Okay, but look, here's the thing. You guys are allowed to disagree about information. I am friends with you. I have a great relationship with Bob Groden. It's all good. We don't have to. That's the whole point. Dialogue, conversation. It's a beautiful thing. No problems. So yeah. So Mark, you
see what I originally wrote about this. Just go ahead and Google Jim DiEugenio on Absolute Proof. Okay, because that's what I originally wrote about this. All right, it's in that review of that particular.
Okay, yeah, and his position, he thinks that the person who's prayer man is just some person with a camera who we haven't found yet.
I believe that is Oswald. Okay, and if you take a look, what's that guy's name who wrote the book, Prayer Man?
Bert Camp.
Yeah, have you had him on?
Not yet, but I'd like to. I'm going to at some point.
Have him on. His book is very convincing, as far as that goes. Now, am I saying that it's a lead pipe cinch? No, I'm not saying it's a lead pipe cinch. But I'm saying that I think he proved it by preponderance of the evidence. Okay, in that book.
I want to move quickly to the next thing, which is the more controversial item, believe it or not. The McCone-Rally memo. All right, so here's where I'm on this. I understand that the consensus in the critical community is probably still that it's not authentic, but I've now had Bob Tannenbaum tell me that it's absolutely authentic and that he saw it there, and then I had Robert Groden tell me not only did Bob Tannenbaum show it to him and is it authentic, but he took it. So, it's like the guy who's famous for taking the Zapruder film took the McCone Rally memo and admitted to it. So to me, like I believe the chain of custody of him taking it from the HSCA. It's just even Robert said it was in a folder and it's not numbered, and so how did it get there and was it authentic? Especially with Tannenbaum's support of that. So what? Go ahead, Jim.
Please.
I'm not saying it's authentic. I'm just saying I believe what he's saying that he took it from there. We don't know who put it there. Go ahead.
If it was there, it was put there as a deliberate fraud. Okay. The idea, and by the way, I think you should describe it a little. Okay. It's a memo between the director of the CIA at the time, John McCone, and the director of the Secret Service at that time, Jim Rowley. All right. And in the memo, there's no other way to say this. McCone spills his guts about all the things that CIA had done to this poor little guy, Oswald. Okay,
Yeah.
how they had trained him, how they had given him instructions. Okay, how even where it took place. Okay, all right, and it's almost like a true confession. It's for that very reason it's unbelievable right then and there that McCone, the guy in the CIA, would actually do this. And by the way, just remember that the two guys running the CIA interface with the Warren Commission at that time were Dick Helms and Jim Angleton. Now, if anybody in their right mind believes that they would let McCone write a document like that, okay, and give it to, I mean, come on, all right? So maybe it was there, but if it was there, I think it was a deliberate red herring, okay?
You can't get more smoking gun than that. I want to touch real quick on the Mafia, just because I'm about to go in to the Mafia, and I'm about to read Jem's favorite book, which is actually there's so many books that you don't like. It's kind of funny, but no. But at any rate, I'm reading a lot of different books on it, and the HSCA has done some incredible work on the Mafia angle of things. But going into it, my feeling is Jack Ruby. There's something going on there with Jack Ruby for sure. And then I'm looking forward to diving into the Robert Mayhew stuff and all of that, and just sorting out the granular details of which mob boss did what things, and what's what all of that. Jim, your general thoughts on the mob, things to look for.
Look, there's actually a movie coming out about Giancana, all right? And it's going to say that him and Rosselli killed JFK, all right? I really dread, and I hope this thing goes direct to video, okay? I hope it actually doesn't get exhibited in theaters, all right? Because it's really, look, the FBI had wall-to-wall surveillance on Giancana. Every place the guy went, there were 4 different places that they had wired, okay, for sound, following this guy, because Bobby Kennedy really wanted to nail Giancana, all right? Now, on top of that, they had 24/7 physical surveillance on Giancana. What do I mean by that? When he would go to a restaurant, they would take the table next to him. When he would go to a golf course, they would be in the couple behind him. When he would go to the bathroom at that restaurant, they would take the urinal next to him. Okay? All right? Then they would park their cars in front of his house at night to make sure that he didn't sneak away anywhere. All right? Now, the guy who actually was in charge of this wrote a book about it later. All right? The FBI agent. And he said, look, I listened to everything about, there isn't one single word about Giancana and the Kennedy assassination on any of those tapes. All right?
Right.
Was in either Las Vegas or Los Angeles on the day of the assassination. So many people who have tried to put these guys, you know, in look, the best you can say is this, and this is something I would agree with. Jack Ruby idolized McCooley. All right, he looked up to him like a big brother that he never had. It would have been very easy for the CIA to get in contact with Trafficante because they had worked with him on the plots to kill Castro. And they would have said, we need somebody to polish off Oswald. He was supposed to be dead by now, but he's still alive. Okay, and Trafficante probably would have called McCooley and said, "Can you take a phone call from him?" All right, and that not only do I think that probably happened, I think that probably did happen. Okay, I think that's the closest thing we can get to a circumstantial case about the mafia in the JFK case. You know, none of this other stuff really, to me, holds any water. Okay.
Mm. All right, Mark, Andrew, any thoughts on the Mafia before we take off here?
No, I mean, I know I've heard Jim talk a lot about McWillie. I think that's very plausible. I think it shows some skin in the game, if you will, on the Mafia's end and what happened in Dallas. But you know, to eliminate Oswald, and you know that much we can say pretty clearly.
Sure. All right. Hey, one thing really fast. November conferences. So I did want to make a quick announcement there. I'm going to be down in Dallas for the JFK Lancer conference. I'll be doing a panel there with Jeff Crudell from JFK The Enduring Secret and Joe Borelli from the Lone Gunman podcast. Just sort of a podcasting panel. And Andrew, you're going to be there too?
Yeah. I think both Mark and I are going to be there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm gonna do a presentation, obviously, on the final determinations and the JFK Records Act.
No, I'm going to Lancer as well, and not speaking on anything at the moment, but I think it'll be a very interesting time of year with the you know, the task force wrapping up. Good to collaborate with everyone on how that's looking, and hopefully some good ideas come of it. So that's what I'm interested in helping with.
For sure. What about you, Jim? Are you planning to go to Dallas?
No.
All right. No, not this time. I've been a few times.
I'm, you know, I've been to so many of these that I think my conference going days are.
No, don't say that.
I just remember the last one I was at, Paul Blow cornered us in his room and he said, I want to do a book.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened.
All right. Okay.
There.
So everybody take a couple of subjects. All right. And that's how I got snookered into doing this. Okay. Which is the last anthology. Well, the first and last. Well, no, it's actually the second anthology book that I ever did after the assassination. So my days of a romance with these JFK conferences has ended. Okay.
Do one in New Orleans. Jim will come to that.
All right. Well. Hey, thanks again, guys, for joining, and definitely have you back again sometime to talk through the next things as I continue this journey of if not Oswald, then who? We got the Mafia, then we got Then it gets fun. Then we get into Cuba, like Fidel Castro. Then we get into the Soviet Union, and then we get back to the exiles, and then we're gonna finally go to the CIA and to the generals. So, hey. All right.
Good.
Israel. I'm gonna do an Israel episode too, just because people talk about it, so we're gonna do it. We're gonna cover it. All right. Anything else?
No,
Well, hey, thanks again, guys.
I've been
and,
following your show, Matt. By the way, your show's been great.
Yep.
I've watched or listened to each of your episodes. Just
Yeah.
such an amazing collection of topics and great analysis, and you do an amazing job.
Yeah, it's fun to
Thanks.
see, some of your early ones and the production, how much better and better it's getting. It's really well done.
Well, my goal is just to interview everyone that Jim disagrees with every week. All right. Well, hey, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Matt, so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good night.